Thank you very much, Dr. Kakilaya, for your kind words of introduction. And of course, for inviting me to deliver this year's B.V. Kakilaya oration. It's a great honor to be associated with the legacy of a great patriot, freedom fighter, communist, somebody who stood throughout his entire life in defense of the rights of the people, and who, through his work as a political leader, as a writer, held out a shining example for future generations, and in particular our generation, as to how the pen, how political ideas, how ideology can and must be used in the service of the people, in the service of solving problems that people confront, supporting the struggles that they wage, fighting for justice, fighting for what is right. I am especially honored to be part of today's function and to deliver this lecture, also because it is a reassertion of the memory, reassertion of the legacy of people who in many ways are the true heroes of India, at a time when bogus histories are being manufactured, at a time when fake personalities with fake legacies are being foisted on the country, and we are supposed to accept these men, there are no women among them. We are supposed to accept these men who are being foisted on us as great personalities who contributed to the nation in some way, whereas the actual historical record is something very, very different. At such a time, for us to pay tribute to our real heroes and for us to bask in the glory of legacy of real fighters is something that is very, very important. And I am deeply honored that I have been invited today to speak on this occasion and to present my views. When Dr. Kakilaya approached me to take part in this event, once it was clear that the dates were fine, the issue that needed to be resolved was what would the topic be. And as a journalist, I've been in the business, of course, of writing, editing for many years, and have delivered a fair number of talks and lectures, invariably drawing most of these talks and lectures that I've given over the last 20 years have tended to draw on areas of specialization that I developed as a journalist. Could be on human rights, could be on Indian foreign policy, could be on the problem of terror, could be on the problem of communal violence. But the pattern that I have seen over the last couple of years is that whenever I've been invited to deliver a lecture, particularly at events such as this, important events in the calendar of a state, in the calendar of a city, in the calendar of people who cherish the memory of an illustrious son or daughter from among them, the topic that has immediately risen to my mind, and also immediately shared by my hosts, and so it was also in this case with Dr. Kakilaya, that we should use this occasion to discuss the state of the media in India. And the title that we chose, What is happening to the media in India, is a very natural question. It's a question all of us whether we are inside the media or whether we read or watch, this is a question that occurs to us virtually every day. I provide this by way of explanation because it wasn't always like this. 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 or 20, or those of you who are older and more senior to me, perhaps in the 60s or 70s, you would rarely have been presented with an opportunity to have a discussion or to express your anxieties and worries about the state of the media as a whole. Sure, we would analyze or look at different aspects of the media's functioning. So, for example, during the movement launched by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, the RSS and the Bharatiya Janata Party from the late 80s onwards against the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, the so-called Ram Janam Bhoomi movement, which culminated in the demolition of a 16th century mosque in Ayodhya. During that moment, yes, we as journalists, you as readers, did ask questions and we did introspect on why a major section of the media had become prone to communal thinking. Why was a section of the media becoming a willing accomplice to the pursuit of a communal political agenda by the Sangh Parivar? And there were many examples, and this has been well documented. The Press Council of India produced a famous report. Scholars like Charu and Mukul produced monographs which catalogued the manner in which some of the major newspapers in North India, particularly Uttar Pradesh, played a very, very damaging role as far as letting their newspaper be used for fostering communal division and so on. And we've discussed those things in the past. We've had other occasions to review the role of the media during 2002, the Gujarat riots, when a section of the Gujarati press, Gujarat Samachar, Sandesh, again was used to foment communal division and to justify the killing of people. And the Editors Guild investigated and produced a report which rightly indicted these newspapers, these editors, these proprietors for abusing the trust that people had reposed in them as the so-called Fourth Estate by spreading communal poison and failing to speak out in defense of the rule of law, failing to speak out in defense of the rights of Indian citizens to live. So we discussed at that time, why is it that a section of the media is prone to communalism? We've discussed at other times, why is it that a section of the media, when it comes to reporting about, say, terror or terrorism, suspends its critical judgment, often accepts whatever the police or whatever the security forces say. We've analyzed different aspects. My former colleague P. Sainath has written extensively on the failure of the Indian media to focus on the problems of rural India, focus on the problems of India's peasants and farmers. We've had other colleagues who have looked at the failure of the media to speak about and address the problems of women and Dalits and Adivasis. We've critiqued the failure of the media to have a representative or a diverse newsroom where women, Dalits, Adivasis have positions in the editorial hierarchy. Today they are, when it at least comes to Dalits and Adivasis, they are virtually absent. Women are there, but it's rare to find women being able to break the glass ceiling and rise to the top. The number of women who have managed to become editors in this media culture in India are, you can count them on your hand, fingers of one hand. So we've had occasion in the past, when we've discussed problems of the Indian media, to focus on these individual issues. And yes, some scholars would have tried to locate the poor performance of the media when it comes to communalism or reporting on law and order and terror, or with regard to gender issues, or with regard to Dalit and Adivasi issues. Scholars have attempted to locate this problem within a larger context, and there's been some discussion on this. But to my mind, never before in such a broad-based way have we had a situation where people want to talk about the role of the media as a whole. They want to question, they are anxious, they are worried at what's happening to the media. And the reason for this worry is not hard to find. Larger and larger sections of the population are discovering that today what they read, what they see, what they hear on media bears little correspondence to the problems that they confront in their day-to-day lives. And they confront and they find that problems which they face, which need to be discussed and raised and analyzed and reported on, are ignored. Issues which are not so important, or perhaps even irrelevant or diversionary, get prominence that it doesn't deserve, they don't deserve. And today, if Indian democracy, Indian political institutions, if the faith of ordinary people in the capacity of these institutions to deliver justice, if that faith is getting eroded, if that faith has come down today, if there is less confidence that people have in their ability to drive their own destiny through elected representatives, through parliamentary or electoral democracy, through the use of institutions that are meant to be answerable and accountable to people, a large part of the blame must lie with the media, whose role it is, whose job it is, to ensure that all the different institutions that exist in our country perform the way they are meant to, perform better than they are meant to, perform in a way that is transparent, perform in a way that is accountable, perform in a way that empowers people and not empowers the privileged. So if the government is pursuing policies which are flawed, erroneous, faulty, damaging, it's the role of the media to highlight that. Now, the media has always been a business. There's nothing new about this. In any capitalist society, in any market-driven society, particularly in a country like ours where philanthropy is not broad-based, is not at a level where it can sustain independent media ventures on a large scale. Media is and will continue to be largely profit-oriented, and driven by private business interests. It is the way today, it is that way today, it's the same it's been 20 years ago, it's the same situation that prevailed at the time of independence. But there is still observable a qualitative change. Media was private in 47, it was private in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it's private today. But today, there is a perception that the media as a whole is failing society, is failing the people. In a way that in the 60s or 70s, perhaps other than the brief period of emergency when all rights were under suspension. So the media's failing was mirrored by the failing of other civic associations, the failure of the judiciary, the failure of every possible countervailing institution. But other than that 2-year period, it's not as if people have been so pessimistic, and it's not as if journalists themselves and editors themselves have been so pessimistic about what is happening in the state of the media. And the issue really is that today the concern that people have reflects the unprecedented level of pressure that is operating on the media as a whole. If today we see, if media has always been private, why is it that today the media is even more reluctant to speak about certain things, even more reluctant to cover the misdeeds of those who are in power, even more reluctant to write about the crimes and misdemeanors of the corporate sector? The reason for this reluctance is that today we have an unprecedented level of pressure that is operating on the media. Now, pressure comes in a variety of ways. Pressure comes from outside. Pressure comes from within also. And what I hope to do in the next 40 minutes is to analyze the sources of this pressure and to see how the media is responding to this pressure in different ways, and how this pressure is actually producing very, very toxic outcomes that are not only corrosive or damaging to the media, but are extremely harmful if we are concerned about the future of democracy, the future of the rights of people in this country. So we are, ladies and gentlemen, living through very different times. We are living through very difficult times. And this is reflected, in my view, in the way in which the media functions. Now, if you were to look at things in a superficial manner, if you were to talk to, say, the Minister of Information and Broadcasting, she is likely to say that, what rubbish. There is no pressure, there is no restriction. She is likely to point to the fact that you have more private 24/7 news channels operating in this country across different languages than you have in the next 10 or 20 countries after, in terms of number. Probably more than 200 channels cutting across different languages. Smriti Irani, who is the Minister for Information and Broadcasting, is likely to point to the large number of daily newspapers, perhaps the largest in the world. More than 800 titles come out every day. Circulation continues to rise, maybe not as fast as it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but it's still not declining overall. And you have newspapers that have multiple editions in different languages. Many of them, although most not, but many make a profit, and quite a handsome profit. Smriti Irani is likely to point to data which suggests that hundreds of millions of Indians have access to the internet, and thus are able to consume media online. That number may be slightly fictional, because the way in which industry measures number of Indians who have access to the internet is by counting the number of Indians who at least once in a month may have visited a website. And so that gives a kind of exaggerated picture. In reality, if you consider net speeds, if you consider data, the cost of data plans and so on, internet usage may not be that high, but it is high, and it's growing fast. And Smriti Irani might well be justified in saying, well, why are you sounding so pessimistic? Look at the data. Smriti Irani may point to the large number of websites, including my own, The Wire, which have emerged in the last couple of years and which have reached respectable high readership and which don't face government restrictions on paper. And focusing on the statistics, one would have to say that, yeah, maybe the minister would have a point. Large number of TV channels, large number of papers, websites, so on and so forth. But the fact is that despite this huge diversity in terms of quantity, there is an alarming uniformity in content across most television news channels. Newspapers are increasingly devoting less and less of their resources to actual news gathering. Television channels are less and less willing to encourage debate and have discussion or to cover issues that the government finds embarrassing. And they are more and more willing to organize debates and discussions and promote news and views on issues that the government wants them to. Another complication is that despite the large number of TV channels and newspapers operating, the vast majority of them have a business model that does not encourage editorial integrity. They run TV channels and newspapers as they would run any other business, as they would manufacture any other product or service. And are not, I'm talking of the vast majority or certainly a large section of media owners, are not bothered about editorial standards, are not bothered about serving the public interest, are not bothered about devoting resources to covering the kind of issues that need to be covered in a country like ours. So, what good is this picture of statistical health if it does not translate into a vibrant, dynamic media culture where issues are highlighted regardless of what the ruling party, regardless of what the Prime Minister, regardless of what the Minister of Information and Broadcasting may think. So let the Minister of Information and Broadcasting, let the MIB, the ministry, limit itself to running Prasar Bharati, Doordarshan, All India Radio. These have always been handmaidens of the government. And although constitutionally and although in terms of an act, Prasar Bharati Act, they are meant to be autonomous in some meaningful sense, but the fact is that successive governments since the creation of the Prasar Bharati Corporation have used Doordarshan and All India Radio essentially as arms of the government. So what is happening today is not different from what happened when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister or when Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. That's not new. And we shouldn't begrudge them their own little fiefs. So if Smriti Irani is concerned about managing the message, putting out a point of view, reporting things in a way that she wants them to be reported, well, she has her platform. Why is she then pulling up, and I think she's done it 2 or 3 times, either her or her ministry, pulling up the Press Trust of India, PTI, for tweets that they may put out or a story that they may issue just because it doesn't conform with an official narrative? Why does the government concern itself with who is the editor of the Hindustan Times? We covered a story recently about the exit of Bobby Ghosh as editor of the Hindustan Times, India's second largest English daily newspaper, one of its oldest, where officially word is put out that, well, the editor wanted to return home to New York, where he came from. But in reality, his exit was preceded by a meeting between the Prime Minister and the proprietor of Hindustan Times. His exit was preceded by efforts by senior government ministers to complain about the kind of coverage that the Hindustan Times was giving as far as certain issues that concern the government are involved. They were upset that the Hindustan Times, which is a large circulating paper, had begun an initiative called the Hate Tracker, where they were cataloging each and every instance since 2014 of hate crimes where people are attacked or targeted because of their religion or caste or gender. Now, why would anybody have a problem with that? If somebody is attacked because of their identity, if somebody is lynched because some fanatics think that he or she had beef in their fridge or was transporting cows for slaughter, as happened in Dadri in Uttar Pradesh or Alwar in Rajasthan, where Pehlu Khan was killed. Why should this bother the government or BJP or anybody? Surely the targeted killing of somebody because of their religion or caste or gender, or I would add their sexual orientation or their language, is something that should be, or their political affiliation, is something that should be condemned in the strongest terms. We are running a story today in The Wire about how terrorists in Jammu and Kashmir have now begun to target, for the first time in several years, political workers of different parties. And there was a dastardly killing of a young BJP youth leader in the valley. All of us have a duty to condemn these kinds of targeted killings. And if somebody wants to make a catalogue and list them, what's the problem? Well, if you belong to a party that is constantly making excuses whenever some of these crimes happen, so when Pehlu Khan is killed in Rajasthan, you can have the Home Minister of Rajasthan saying that, well, you know, he should not have been transporting cows. Or when Akhlaq is killed in Dadri, you have the culture minister or some other MLA from the Bharati Janata Party in Uttar Pradesh saying, well, he should not have eaten beef. Just like when women are attacked in this country, you have some wretched politician somewhere or the other who says, why did she dress that way? Why did she go out at night? So if you are going to belong to a party that is always making excuses and looking for alibis and justifications for when crimes of this kind take place, then obviously you're not going to be happy. But you have taken an oath on the Constitution to uphold the rule of law without fear or favor, without discrimination. And if Indian citizens are being targeted because of their identity, maybe gender, maybe religion, maybe caste, whatever, then surely this needs to be catalogued, surely this needs to be analyzed, surely this needs to be condemned, surely justice needs to take place. But the fact that the Hindustan Times editor started this initiative was something that clearly upset the government, although they denied it. But then, one day after the editor finally leaves Hindustan Times, the first big change that happens in the paper is that the hate tracker is taken down from the website. So all the denials, all the claims that we are for free press, we are not objecting to hate tracker, well, it's too much of a coincidence, isn't it? That this thing vanishes. And that is not the only thing that has vanished. Part of the reason why you are concerned about what is happening in the media, we are concerned as journalists about what is happening in the media is that the number of instances of stories and articles that vanish from websites of newspapers is increasing. I've been a journalist working in newspapers and the media for around nearly 20 years now, 22. And we never came across these kinds of instances. Sure, there would be pressure before a piece is published, and proprietors, editors would be very, very scared sometimes. I've seen examples of those where management was very reluctant to allow a story against, say, Reliance to be published, or against Coca-Cola, another holy cow for some reason. But once it got published, it got published. Today we see examples of Times of India and DNA doing a story, quite a harmless story, on how the assets of Amit Shah, president of the BJP, grew by 300% between the last time he filed his election returns and 2017 when he submitted an affidavit for the Rajya Sabha elections. So reporters looked at these documents, compared the 2017 affidavit with an earlier one and said, well, and they put out a story saying that his assets had grown by 300%. It's a statement of fact. If you go back and find and read those original stories, there was no insinuation about Mr. Shah's assets having grown through illegitimate means. But somewhere, down the line, someone decided that this is not a nice story to be out there. And mysteriously, after having been published in the paper, and after having gone up on the website of these two newspapers, the stories vanish. And when you call the editors of the newspaper and say, "Bhai, kya hua? Why was the story taken down?" Nobody wants to take responsibility. Nobody wants to even acknowledge anything. And of course, nobody in government or nobody in the BJP wants to talk about it either. In Rajasthan, a story was done about how, again, Times of India, how the Pradhan Mantri insurance scheme for farmers was not exactly working the way that the Prime Minister had promised farmers it would work. And the reporter gave examples of farmers who had not received compensation or who had received inadequate compensation and who had, of course, paid a lot in terms of premiums that they never got a return for when their crops were damaged. And again, the story, after being printed in Jaipur, comes to the notice of the newspaper hierarchy in Delhi and then vanishes. TV channels decide that they want to have a discussion on a certain topic. Word filters up and down the managerial food chain, and by evening orders are given, topic is changed, guests are disinvited. This is today a routine part of media functioning. That there is close monitoring by the government of stories that are considered negative. And this is happening from a government that, this is the first time in 40 years perhaps, that the Prime Minister's office has not bothered to appoint a spokesperson. Because they said media is not important. Let the media do what it wants. We have our own method of communication. It now turns out that there is an active media department in the Prime Minister's office and in the government, but their job is not to answer questions. Their job is not to provide information to anybody. Their job is to monitor. Their job is to put pressure. Their job is to lean on proprietors, because they know that leaning on a proprietor is the most effective way of ensuring you get the right kind of coverage. Journalists are very unreliable. A journalist will promise, I won't write, or I will write, and she or he may not deliver. Proprietors are very reliable. And they're very reliable because most of them have multiple business interests that extend well beyond the media. So if you want to put pressure on a media house, on the owner of a media house, you don't need to put pressure on the media company directly. You don't need to raid their office. You don't need to confiscate their printing press. You don't need to stop them from uplinking or downlinking. You need to get the Income Tax Department or the Enforcement Directorate or some other division of the government to start looking at the books of all the other businesses. So if somebody has a newspaper and they also run a power company, there are bound to be 101 violations that that power company is engaged in. If they're running a transport company, if they have a factory of some kind, if they have some other business, that's where you lean on them. That's where you put pressure. So you can always say later, I'm not putting pressure on the media. And when you have owners who don't have other businesses, like NDTV, for example, is limited to just being a media company. You come up with a trumped-up charge of some private person's complaint about a loan interest rate being cut back. Again, private complainant worried about a private bank on a loan transaction which the bank itself took a haircut on, as they say. And you use this complaint, which is 5 years old, to suddenly send the income tax man knocking at midnight or early morning. The one channel that has tended to buck the trend of subservience. So you use the instrumentalities at your disposal to lean on, to put pressure, to remind the owners of media that you are vulnerable. That is all very well that you want to be brave, you want to be independent, those few of you who are like that. It's all very well to have delusions of grandeur, delusions of being independent, but in reality, we own you. We have 101 ways of making life difficult for you. We saw during the Atal Bihari Vajpayee days the manner in which the then website, Tehelka, was brought to its knees after it did an expose of arms deals or corruption in arms dealing in the highest levels of, various levels of government. They managed to get the then president of the BJP to resign because he was caught on camera showing his willingness to accept a bribe. Well, the promoters of Tehelka found themselves within a few weeks answering the midnight knock of the Enforcement Directorate and the Income Tax, all different branches of government, looking into their books with a fine-tooth comb, until finally Tehelka itself had to back off. So we have examples of this in the past, and we have illustrations of this tendency today, and this is paints a very vivid picture for media proprietors who, in any case, are more likely than not to have a bias in favor of the government, in favor of the ruling party, because that is the tendency of business people. And that explains why the lion's share of your media today does not want to organize debates and discussions on difficult topics. In one of the first major developments that was newsworthy in the previous government, a scandal, if you will, and I'm taking you back now to 2014, a major scandal that went completely uncovered, unreported, not discussed, not debated in the media, was the manner in which the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, which the BJP, when it was in opposition, used to run down as a caged parrot, because it was always functioning as the loyal voice of the government. In 2014, the CBI decides, after Amit Shah, who by then had become president of BJP, after Amit Shah managed to get discharged from a CBI special court on the murder charge, on the conspiracy to murder case involving the killing of a woman called Kausar B and somebody called Sohrabuddin. Amit Shah and a lot of senior police officers had been charge-sheeted by the CBI on the basis of an investigation that had been ordered by the Supreme Court of India and that had been monitored by the Supreme Court of India. And yet, the CBI Special Court judge, in his own wisdom, decided in December 2014, despite all the evidence that the CBI had marshaled, that no case was made out and that Mr. Amit Shah need not even stand trial. It has hardly ever happened in the history of India that somebody charged by an agency like the CBI with murder is exonerated before even a trial can take place. Never happened. Did you read editorials about it? Did you see discussions on TV? Did you see any TV anchor asking angrily why the CBI to this date has not bothered to even appeal that decision? It is standard when the CBI loses a case that you go and appeal. And here is a case that you worked on for many years under the supervision of the Supreme Court. You file a charge sheet, but because the target of that charge now happens to be president of BJP, okay, I can understand why the CBI is not going to go and appeal. Right? The CBI is a caged parrot, so there's no surprise there. But why did the media become a caged parrot in not asking this question? So 3 years later, we still hear from Mr. Modi, as any Prime Minister would say, where is the charge of corruption or misuse of power against me, against my government? So there is an implicit acknowledgement that not all has gone according to script as far as the election promises are concerned. But we are repeatedly being assured that there is no corruption. Well, isn't the failure of the CBI to go and appeal in a case like this not an example of corruption? Again, forget him. he is doing his dharma by saying that I'm perfect. That's, every Prime Minister does that. But we are talking today about what is happening in the media. And what explains the complete absence of the media to even pose this question? Many of you in the room might have heard these facts for the first time, or thought about it for the first time, because there has been no discussion on this. There has been no analysis, barring a few odd pieces here and there. This is a great taboo subject that nobody wants to touch, nobody wants to discuss. Instead, today you have the most prominent channels who present themselves as fighters for justice, who present themselves as outliers in some way, who blame other media for being anti-national. And they present themselves as being nationalist media. And this section of the media loves to say that it is speaking in the voice of the nation. They love to say that we are media that puts India first, and that everybody else who doesn't sing their tune is somehow unpatriotic, is somehow anti-national. And this section of the media, which is the dominant section today, in terms of income, in terms of reach, in terms of advertising, what this section of the media does fits like a hand in the glove of government agenda. What the government wants these channels to focus on, these channels loyally focus on those topics. Mr. Arun Shourie, former editor of the Indian Express, former member of parliament, former minister, still perhaps a BJP member, recently used the phrase North Korean media to describe channels like Times Now and Republic TV. And what he meant by North Korean media is that kind of media which is, of course, adulatory towards the great leader, sees all news and developments that are contrary to what the great leader wants as not only being against the great leader, but also against the nation. And that will go to any length to justify government claims, make excuses for the government. You saw the spectacle during demonetization of some of these North Korean channels, presenting to readers the fake news about how the 2,000 rupee note came with a special chip that would help unearth black money even if it was buried 60 feet underground. I don't know how they came up with this figure of 60 feet. But it's these little details that are interesting. And that was, of course, very blatant propaganda. But there were lots of other little fictions that were told about how things have got back to normal, and how, as the government changed its script with each passing week, from demonetization being a move against black money, to becoming a move against counterfeit currency, to becoming a move against terror financing, to becoming a move towards a cashless economy, to eventually becoming a move towards less cash. And finally, Mr. Jaitley and Mr. Modi have settled on this idea that, well, more people will emerge as income taxpayers at the end when the dust settles. So 7 or 8 different stories have been told by the government, as each preceding story has been debunked by facts on the ground. And the North Korean channels have faithfully gone along with this narrative and presented that version in an uncritical fashion. Ravish, of course, calls them Godi media. Media that is perpetually in the lap of the government. And he's not far from the truth, because essentially what you have is a dominant section of the media, well, one section of the media against whom there is pressure of one kind or the other. One section of the media, which is the Times Now, Republic TV kind of section, which has emerged as cheerleaders of the government. And then you have a section in the middle that essentially goes with the flow, that does not want to rock the boat. They would be happy to take a pot shot once in a while at minor players in government. So you may find a story against Smriti Irani or against General V.K. Singh or against some of these clowns like Giriraj Singh or Sadhvi Niranjan Jyoti, or minor players, Sangeet Som, the Taj Mahal guy, there will be outrage against these kinds of people as a kind of safety valve or to prove that we are critical media. But when it comes to asking the tough questions, everybody, since I mentioned Sangeet Som and the Taj Mahal, everybody was aghast and shocked, including the North Korean channels, that you could have a BJP politician attacking the Taj Mahal in this way. And they were a bit perplexed when they went to, because the BJP also took some time to come up with its script. The instinct of the BJP is to defend what any of their fellows do, no matter what madness it may be, what terrible, maybe every party is like that, I don't know. But certainly the BJP is like that. So after Sangeet Som said what he did, you then had other spokespersons in one way or the other putting some distance between themselves and Som, but also in a way justifying what he said. Until one fine day, the BJP High Command must have realized that this is not a good controversy for us to have. People of India will think we are completely crazy. And Yogi Adityanath was then asked to make a visit to the Taj Mahal and to do a bit of jhadu pocha there with his brooms, and to somehow reassure the people of India that don't worry, the Taj Mahal is safe in our hands. And as soon as he did that, the media quickly moved away. There was no eagerness to force the BJP to introspect about how, from within its own camp, how its own spokespersons had defended what Sangeet Som said in one way or the other. Just 2 days before that, there was no attempt to force BJP to apologize for attacking one of India's greatest monuments, for trying to tarnish its reputation. It was as if the BJP, the government, had decided we want to put a lid on this controversy and move on, and that is precisely what happened. So controversies are, when they emerge, they are managed. And sometimes fake controversies are created to divert people's attention. And the media is fully complicit in this management of controversies, management of news, management of what people are supposed to think. And I'll give you a couple of examples, further examples to illustrate my point. A few months ago, after the by-election in Srinagar for the parliamentary seat, I'm talking now of August, you had the case of a young Kashmiri man who was picked up by the army and tied to a jeep and paraded as a human shield for several hours. There is, at this point, nor at that point, any dispute about certain basic facts. That the young man, Farooq Dar, was one of only 7% of people in the Srinagar constituency to have cast his vote that day. We always hold out elections in Jammu and Kashmir as an example of rule of law. Whenever Pakistan or somebody says there should be plebiscite, we say, well, there is a plebiscite every time there's an election. So this young man was one of those guys who took part in our plebiscite. He defied the threats of extremists. He defied the appeals of the Hurriyat and others who wanted a boycott, and he went and voted. Undisputable fact. Second undisputable fact is that he remained tied to the jeep and was driven around for 3 or 4 hours over a distance of 20-30 kilometers. You have eyewitnesses who have been quoted in the press. Hindustan Times actually recreated his journey. They followed the route that he took when he was tied to this. So he was tied for not 10 minutes or 15 minutes as an extraordinary measure to come out of a difficult situation, but as a humiliating form of punishment, as a form in a way of collective punishment, sending a message to people as a whole, that this is the fate that awaits any Kashmiri who bothers to throw stones. This was the message that it's not clear. I leave that open. He denies he was a stone thrower. Army says he was. I would say the burden of evidence, given that he is one of the few people who voted, would suggest that he's not a stone thrower. So when he says he isn't, and when it's clear that he voted, I would say we go along with his version. But it is undisputed that he was driven for several hours. Instead of the media reacting the way a civilized media should react, a media that is concerned about the rule of law should react, instead of highlighting a terrible injustice done to a citizen of India by people who are supposed to uphold the law, whatever the difficult circumstances they may be in, doesn't relieve anybody from the responsibility of upholding the law. The media gave up that narrative. I'm talking about the dominant, these North Korean channels, and ran a vituperative campaign, not only against this young man, but against all Kashmiris, against anybody who bothered to speak out in defense of the rights of that young man, against anybody who had a criticism to make against the army officers who tied him to that jeep. And what should have been, a sensitive media, aggressively reporting the story and righting a wrong, would actually have gone some distance towards reassuring the people of Kashmir. I'm talking about if media truly wants to be India first, if you want to be a responsible national media, then if this media had reported that story honestly and with empathy, it would have served to reassure those disgruntled young men and women in Jammu and Kashmir who today feel disenchanted, disillusioned, who today feel that there is no justice for them in the country. But these North Korean channels, this Godi media, took the narrative in an entirely different direction, reported the government claims uncritically, even when it was quite unbelievable. For example, we were supposed to believe that in the midst of a stone-pelting mob comprising of thousands of people, where there was a imminent threat to life, an army officer had 9 or 10 minutes, which would be the time it takes to go catch somebody, get a rope, secure the fellow nicely to a jeep. It takes time, right? You can't do it in half a minute or 1 minute, at least 5 minutes. And during those 5 minutes, this crowd which is about to throw stones on you and kill you is calmly watching and not interfering. Neither did they throw stones, nor did you fire at anybody, which was what you said was going to happen if you didn't do this. You take 6-7 minutes to tie the chap to the jeep. Even if then we accept the official story, you then go off and drive for 4 hours. And to this date, there is no answer from anybody who justifies what was done as to what was the need to drive this person around for 4 hours if the idea was to escape from a dangerous situation that was life-threatening. Once you got out of that situation, you should have untied him and let him go. Or put him in the jeep, imprison him. If you think he's a stone thrower, which is what the army claimed, well, why was he not charged? So basic questions that you learn as a reporter to ask. That if somebody says, I tied this person to a jeep because there were stones being thrown, sir, how long did it take you to tie him? What was happening during the time you took to tie the person? Nobody wanted to ask those questions on these channels. Their role was simply to spread a huge amount of disinformation and change the narrative completely. Another example is the manner in which, and in fact, the way in which these channels vilify Kashmiris day in, day out, even representatives of parliamentary parties like PDP or National Conference or Communist Party. If they are Kashmiri, regardless of the fact that they fight elections under great difficulty, you have these anchors on these channels labeling them anti-national, pro-Pakistan. So this ease with which labels are attached, abuse is given against Kashmiris as a whole, leads me to believe that these channels are not simply North Korean, quote unquote, to use Shauri's phrase. There is another, even more sinister dimension. And sticking to this idea of finding a geographical analogy, I am reminded of the media of Rwanda, the Central African country, which in 1994, the private radio station there, Radio Mille Collines, was instrumental in fomenting hatred against the minority Tutsis and played a crucial role in the genocide against the Tutsis that took place in 1994, which led to the death of perhaps as many as 500,000 people. The question that occurs to me whenever I tune into these channels, Times Now, Republic TV, night after night, or maybe 4 nights a week, there will be some discussion on a so-called Muslim theme. Madarsa, love jihad, beef, Vande Mataram, triple talaq, polygamy, bigamy. And they will catch hold of some kind of so-called Muslim representatives, typically very obscurantist clerics who perform to script, defending very reactionary positions. And this will then be presented to viewers as a so-called Muslim view. And the whole idea of doing this night after night, week after week, to my mind, is to create an ideological basis for communal division in this country. You have channels and anchors now openly referring to themselves as we Hindus. We Hindus are not like that. There was a discussion on the day that news broke from Gorakhpur of the death of infants in that hospital. And the discussion on one of these channels was about why some madarsa somewhere was refusing to sing Vande Mataram, as if that's such a topic to discuss. And when somebody among the panel said, we should not talk about this, we should talk about the death of children in Gorakhpur, the anchor angrily shouts at that person and says, why are you diverting attention away from the real issue? So the real issue for this Godi media, for this Rwandan media, is some perfidy, alleged perfidy of some Muslim somewhere in India. Could be a Zakir Naik or a SDPI or a PFI or Bukhari, Azam Khan, some random hate-spewing Maulana in Calcutta, of whom you probably have dozens of Hindu equivalents who never make it to television. But this occupies prime time night after night. Now I notice on a couple of channels a continuous campaign to say there should be an out-of-court settlement for the Babri Masjid. And the Shia Waqf Board, which has no locus standi in the matter, none whatsoever, they are not party to the dispute in a legal sense. The title suit was settled by, in a way, upheld by the High Court in Allahabad. So there are only 3 parties now. There is no Shia Waqf Board. And the matter is pending before the Supreme Court. And the government clearly seems anxious to speed things up. So there is some kind of design operating here. Suddenly out of the woodwork, people who are unconnected to the suit come on these channels, start saying this, start saying that. And a whole atmosphere is created again to say that there should be an out-of-court settlement. How can there be an out-of-court settlement when you have as great a power imbalance in political terms today as you have in Uttar Pradesh or in Delhi? Is it rational to even think in terms of an out-of-court settlement when you have somebody like Yogi Adityanath as the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh? When you have somebody like Narendra Modi as Prime Minister of India? That ship has sailed. It sailed 20 years ago, if it ever was in port to begin with. But night after night, channels are promoting this idea that there should be an out-of-court settlement, and it is the Muslims who are obstacles to this out-of-court settlement. Love jihad, so-called, is another favorite topic that these channels pick up on, promote. And all common sense goes out of the window. All of a sudden, an adult woman is spoken about as if she's a child, as if she can be sent off to her father or her brother. The same media that laughs at Saudi Arabia when it says that women cannot go out in public unless they are accompanied by a so-called meher, by a male relative, treats adult women in the same patronizing fashion. You have courts that are doing this. 2 high courts now, Kerala and Rajasthan, have given these kind of peculiar judgments. Where is the outcry? Instead of outcry, you have the media debating in a way that suggests that actually the judges who have given these rulings are justified. So, the major section of the media today, to my mind, is fully complicit with the agenda of communalizing society, communalizing the polity, dividing people on religious lines, and ensuring that people don't ask those difficult questions about the economy, about what's happening in society, about living, about employment, about jobs, about the condition of our hospitals. And whose interest does this kind of debate serve then? Obviously those who made promises that they have not delivered on, who made promises that they don't know how to deliver on, who made promises that they have no intention of delivering on, and who know that if people remain focused on those promises, there will be hell to pay the next time elections come around. So you have a section of the media that is pressed into service to do this kind of discussion day in, day out. Those sections of the media that do not toe the line or that report about other things, you either have the income tax fellows knocking on their door, or you can have advertisements turned off. Latest example, I mean, it's an example that has been there for the last 3 years, but Rajasthan Patrika Group, which is the largest Hindi newspaper in Rajasthan, because of its criticism of the Vasundhara Raje government from many years, has been denied ads by the government, and has taken, to my mind, a very courageous stand, and probably there will be consequences that Mr. Gulab Kothari will have to pay and the rest of the business will have to pay. But the brave stand they have taken is that in relation to this ordinance that the Rajasthan government has passed, where it is a criminal offense for journalists to report about corruption charges against officials or politicians until such time that the government gives sanction. Who's heard of this kind of absurd law? Crazy law. Completely unconstitutional. Completely illegal. So outrageous that Vasundhara Raje was forced to backtrack as far as passing that law on the floor of the assembly is concerned. But the ordinance that she passed in secret remains. And the Patrika has said, as long as this law, black law, remains, they had a nice phrase in Hindi, जब तक कानून काला रहेगा, Vasundhara Raje के government पे ताला रहेगा, they're going to not cover the government or its activities, as long as she remains hostile to the press. I think it's a very bold, courageous stand, echoing in some ways the defiance we saw during the emergency when newspapers would print blank editorials until the censor wisened up to that and said, we won't allow you to publish blank spaces either. You have to fill it with some text. But it was an act of defiance while it lasted, and I applaud the Rajasthan Patrika Group, but they are vulnerable in a variety of ways. And of course the other way, the new way, the fashionable way of going after critics, going after people who write about things that are uncomfortable or that you don't want written about, is to take them to court and file defamation cases. I stand here before you as somebody who is now fighting 4 defamation cases. 2 of them are worth 100 crore each. One filed by Jai Amit Shah, one filed by Mr. Gautam Adani. 2 of which are worth 20 crore each, so that's 40 crores filed by Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, businessman and media proprietor and member of parliament. There was a criminal defamation case filed against us by Subhash Chandra of the Z Group, but he withdrew it when he realized that he was on, all of these cases are on a weak wicket, but Mr. Subhash Chandra had the wisdom to realize that he was on a very, very weak wicket. So he withdrew his case. But this is a form of intimidation. This is a form of putting pressure. I don't think it is a coincidence that everybody who has taken the wire to court has some connection or the other to the ruling party. Subhash Chandra is a so-called independent MP backed by the BJP. Rajiv Chandrasekhar is a so-called independent MP who just happens to be co-convener of NDA in Kerala. So where his political loyalties lie, we know. Mr. Adani, his political loyalties and are well known. And of course, Jai Amit Shah is the son of the BJP president. I'm not allowed to speak because there's an injunction about the reasons why Jai Amit Shah took the wire to court. But to file a 100 crore civil defamation case and to follow it up with a criminal defamation case tells you how desperate the powers that be are in this country to make sure that journalists and others keep their mouths shut. And it's not just journalists who are victims of this. Kamal Haasan, actor and director in Tamil Nadu, for doing nothing other than saying a matter-of-fact, making a matter-of-fact statement that you have some extremists or terrorists who also are Hindu, just like some are Muslim, some are Christian, some are atheist. You have a defamation case and an injury to a religious beliefs case filed in Varanasi, of all places, which the police admits. I think hearing was meant to be today. Who knows what is going to happen? You have other kinds of defamation cases filed, other kinds of pressure being put on scholars and academics. Sir, it's very disturbing, please. Huh? I've lost my train of thought now. You have liberal use of defamation by corporates, by people in power, by people related to people in power. In the case of Jai Amit Shah, who's supposed to be a private citizen, that's what his lawyer told us. You have the Additional Solicitor General of India seeking and receiving permission to represent him even before the Wire published the story, which I'm not allowed to talk to you about. 2 days before the story appears, simply on the basis of questions put, this so-called private citizen manages to enlist the support of the Additional Solicitor General of India. So it's very clear that the decision to use the courts to harass, to intimidate, to put pressure, whether it's on the Wire or it's on individuals who are speaking out. I'm not even saying speaking, Kamal Hassan. It's his view, it's his point of view. A professor giving a lecture somewhere, it's her point of view. Giving a lecture is not an anti-national act. If students in Delhi University want to have a discussion about privacy, you can have the Delhi School of Economics director telling them, what does this have to do with economics if you cannot get a room? Or somebody else will say there's a threat of violence. I was meant to give a lecture in Allahabad University in January 2016. And I was invited by the Vice Chancellor, who even, he was supposed to chair my lecture. And because the ABVP decided that they will not let me speak, on the train to Allahabad, I get a call from the DCP saying, sir, it's better if you don't come. I said, well, I'm already on my way. So he says, well, you cannot go to, it's forbidden for you to go to Allahabad University campus. I said, I'm sorry, I've come to meet people. I'm going to meet them. He says, we have booked a room for you in Circuit House. You go there. And we'll bring whoever you want to meet there. I said, nothing doing. So the people who invited me, the students who wanted to hear me, stood their ground. We held a meeting outside the campus gates. Then I went to campus, met the Vice Chancellor to say, how dare you disinvite me? And he said, well, there was threat of violence. I said, well, if there's a threat of violence, it is your responsibility and the responsibility of the police to not allow hecklers and violent people to disrupt the democratic rights of those people who want to be peaceful. What kind of a democracy are we living in? If the heckler, the shouter, the stone pelter, the mob have all the rights, and those who want to be peaceful, who want to speak, who want to debate, have no rights. You speak, be prepared to face a defamation case. You publish a book, be prepared to have your book banned. You make a movie, be prepared to have the censor board make all kinds of demands on you that you cut this dialogue, cut this scene, cut that scene, don't use the word GST. He got away with, Marsal got away with it in Tamil, but for Telugu now that they are being forced to make cuts. Across the board, when we say what's happening to the media in India today, well, the media is the most egregious example, in many ways the most worrying example, because if the mouth of the media is shut, that's a very, very bad omen for democracy. But ours is not the only mouth which is being shut. Movie producers, filmmakers, artists, poets, lecturers, students. The other day, somebody has been arrested in Tamil Nadu for sending a private message where he abused the Prime Minister. A private message has been booked under the Information Technology Act. Complete misuse of the law, just like the case against Kamal Hassan is misuse of the law. But these kinds of police actions are increasingly becoming the norm. And we need to find, first of all, we need to register our opposition to this kind of abuse of the law. We need to stand our ground and say that we will not be silenced. I can tell you with utmost confidence that the why will not be silenced by court cases. We will continue to do the kind of journalism that we set out to do when we said we want to create in this country a not-for-profit media platform. Because our analysis is that what is crucial is who pays for the media. As long as it is the corporate sector, the advertiser, governments, big investors, they will call the shots, they will decide what gets published and what doesn't. What this country needs is media where the reader herself pays, the reader himself pays, invests, lends support, so that you have the possibility of independent media establishments, big or small, that can report honestly, truthfully, objectively things that others don't want to report. George Orwell once said that news is what somebody doesn't want you to print. Everything else is publicity material. And in an interview to New Yorker, Vineet Jain, who is one of the owners of Times of India, admitted that Times of India is not in the news business, it's in the advertisement business. So we need to restore that George Orwell in these Orwellian times. We need to recover that idea that news is what others don't want to print. And precisely because others don't want you to print, there will be threats of defamation, there will be threats of one case or the other, there will be perhaps even more direct threats like Gauri Lankesh had to deal with and finally paid with it with her life. Or other examples in Tripura, for example, where a mob set upon a young journalist who was covering a rally and killed him on the spot. So these are also the kind of threats that journalists are confronting in this country at this time. But you have legal threats, you have commercial threats, you have all kinds of threats happening in an overall environment where it is becoming increasingly difficult to be able to speak your mind. And in order to defeat those who don't want us to say what we want to say, what we would like to say, everybody has to stand their ground. A question that I'll end on this last note, a question that is often put to me when I discuss the media with people is, why is it that in America, where the media is corporate owned, private owned, it's private media, and you have Donald Trump, who in many ways mirrors the same kind of sensibilities towards the media as our Pradhan Sevak does, Mr. Modi, the same kind of contempt towards media. But media in America today is behaving far more independently. The more the government wants to suppress information, the more aggressive they have become in unearthing that information. What is the reason why US media today is holding its head above the water, while the vast majority, the largest section of the Indian media is getting drowned, cannot deal with this pressure? And I can think of, I would say, 3 broad reasons. Each of them is in some ways quite disturbing, because it suggests It points us in the direction of the unfinished task of Indian democracy. It points us in a way back to the legacy of B.V. Kakalia, what he stood for, what he fought for, and how a lot of what he fought for still remains for us to fight for. But first, the first point, that in the United States compared to India, countervailing institutions have a lot more integrity. They are much more fierce in defending their autonomy, whether it's the judiciary at every level, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's the State Department. It's well known, for example, that in that presidential system where the president is all-powerful, the State Department, which is the foreign policy, the foreign ministry of the United States, doesn't see eye to eye with Trump's agenda. And despite whatever he's saying or doing, they find ways to maintain some kind of a balance as far as upholding the prior commitments of the US are concerned. You compare that to the shameful situation we saw here, where the Ministry of External Affairs published a book, official book of the MEA, on Deen Dayal Upadhyay, which is fine. You can publish a book on whoever you want. But this book has a line where it says that one of the great contributions of Deen Dayal Upadhyay is that he eventually created a situation where only the BJP is the true alternative for India. How can you have this kind of a line in a book published by a Government of India ministry? The same book has lines saying, Bharatiya means Hindu, which of course is the philosophy of Deen Dayal Upadhyay, but it's written as if this is the Ministry of External Affairs' point of view, that Hindu and India are the same. Turning one's back not just on 70 years of constitutional history, but 3,500 years of recorded history in this country, a country which has celebrated its pluralism and not tried to straitjacket in narrow definitions what India is or what India stands for. So the institutions in this country, judiciary, ministries, University Grants Commission, you name it, far less willing to assert their independence and their autonomy than their counterparts in the US. And I think that is one reason why the US media, in a way, derives some strength from the fact that different branches of US government function in a way that is more independent, more autonomous, and with greater integrity. It's unthinkable, for example, that a lower court in India would give the kind of ruling that we saw in Honolulu or Washington State against Donald Trump's visa ban when he tried to prevent Muslims from 8 countries from entering the United States. That order was struck down not by a high court or a Supreme Court equivalent, but by lower courts, lower federal courts. And so I would say the integrity of institutions. Secondly, the integrity of the media in the US. There's greater professional pride in the craft of journalism than we see here. Maybe it's because US media today is what it has become over 100 years of evolution. And today, whereas in India, the media proprietors are unwilling to embrace editorial values in the way that US proprietors, for one reason or the other, have been forced to embrace. But there is a deep rot within our own media enterprises that militates against free and independent media, and which in a way becomes a kind of pressure on journalism that operates from within. And lastly, I would say, again this is an open question, whether, I pose it as a question really, whether civil society, civic organizations in this country are more willing, whether civic organizations and the broad masses in this country value media freedom in the same way that people in the United States appear to value it. People there take, when not just media freedom, but broad civic freedoms, constitutional values. When Donald Trump passed his ban before the court struck it down, and reports came of Muslim passengers arriving in airports being stranded. Do you remember what happened? Hundreds of lawyers went to these airports to offer free services. Do we see that happening, say, with the Rohingyas today in India? You have media channels that say India should push the Rohingyas into a boat and put them out into the sea, because everybody knows that Burma is not going to take them back. So one of these channels said, just put them on a boat and leave them in the middle of the ocean. This kind of crass lack of sensibility, lack of sensitivity, lack of fidelity to not just the constitutional values of India, but the cultural and historical traditions of this country, is something which disturbs me a great deal. It's hard to say how deep this kind of attitude runs, but certainly the middle class, the urban middle class, which needs to be more vocal, not just in terms of defending the importance of a free media and importance of free speech, but also in terms of defending the rights of those who are voiceless, defending the rights of those who are disempowered, defending the rights of those who are being attacked or vilified or targeted. Unless the urban middle class rises, speaks in defense of justice, in defense of the rights of people, I think the overall climate, political climate, the overall cultural climate will be vitiated and will certainly create an environment that will work against media freedom and make it harder and harder for the media to perform the kind of honorable role, perform the kind of vital role that India's democracy needs of it. Thank you very much.